I want this to stop, but I perfectly understand why people don't want it to stop and see the reason for it not to stop. I don't want to see any more people killed in Gaza. I can't bear that spectacle. I can't bear to think that people with whom I'm not an Israeli. I don't, not all that interested in the country, except as an idea. I don't visit it much, but nonetheless, I feel an affiliation with them. So I feel people to whom my kin, if you like, my family are doing this. We're not supposed to do that. We shouldn't do that. We don't believe in that. It's inscribed on our hearts that we don't murder. On the other hand, I perfectly well see that we cannot sit back and be murdered. So I go there and back. I am horrified and sympathetic to the Israeli government's predicament every day. Today I'm for Israel. Tomorrow I'm against Israel.
A year since October the 7th. How have the still bewildering, horrendous, tragic events of that day affected Jewish people in this country? And what about the war that has followed? Howard Jacobson is a Man Booker Prize winning novelist and journalist. You almost certainly will have read one of his wonderful novels, I'm sure, in your life. He's written about his thoughts this week and joins us now. Howard, good morning to you.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you. What do you think when you look back to the last year, its impact, I suppose, on how people regard Jewish people in this country, or Israel, or a combination of the two?
I'm not over the shock yet. I'm still suffering the shock, not of the massacre itself, which was unspeakable. We don't even need to talk about that. That's why it's unspeakable. We know that people can do horrendous things, and any fresh example of people doing horrendous, brutal things in the name of an ideology or a hurt, real or imagined, that's not new to us. What was new to me anyway was realizing that I was living in a world in which people who I thought espoused civilized values, people at universities, people in elite institutions could cheer on the brutality. That's the one. It happened on the same day of the massacre, and that's the one I still can't get my mind round, and keep writing about it to see if I can get to the bottom of it. How could this be that people cheered on this brutality at the same time? And here's a kind of ghoulish black farce: they denied it. The same people were denying it and cheering it on at the same time.
And
how could that go on?
And has that persisted? Has that view, in your view? Because what we're talking about here is an event like this happens, and you, as a Jewish man, feel that what people in this country have not recognised it for an atrocity, or have found some ways to park it so it doesn't get felt as an atrocity.
Yes, I think both. I think it's changed a bit. I think it's harder to deny it now, and it's harder to pretend it wasn't as terrible. But there are still people there was a film recently shown, shocking film, We Will Dance Again, about the shooting up of those poor young people at the dance festival, and people watching that. Do I know what percentage of people? No, but I do know that people wrote in saying it's another Israeli lie. The myth of the Israeli lie is a terrifying thing. I feel I'm living in a maelstrom of lies in which everybody is lying. So I suppose I shouldn't complain when other people feel it's a lie too. It's a terrible thing that we just don't seem to know what truth is. We don't want truth, or at least the only truth we want is our truth. So there's a Jewish truth, there's a Palestinian truth, and as all your speakers have been saying this morning, how are we ever going to get Palestinians and Jews to accept, to a degree at least, the truth of the other person's position?
It's such a good point. And I wonder, how much has the conduct of Israel in the year that's followed contributed to that, both in terms of what they've done and what they've said about what they've done? Because any form of moral equivalence in to do with death, I think, takes us nowhere. But the fact of the matter remain, there was a terrorist atrocity on October the 7th, which led 1,200 people dead. Since then, military action on the part of Israel has led to thousands of Palestinians being killed. What do we do with that morally? And does the conduct of Israel impact on this at all?
Yes, of course it does. And how do we get the truth of that? Each morning I wake up on one side or the other, violently and and passionately on one side or the other. Delighted if Israel has had a triumph that seems to me a worthwhile, a true, believable triumph. Horrified when I see the cost of that. And I just clatter between the two. I want this to stop, but I perfectly understand why people don't want it to stop and see the reason for it not to stop. I don't want to see any more people killed in Gaza. I can't bear that spectacle. I can't bear to think that people with whom I'm not an Israeli. I don't. Not all that interested in the country, except as an idea. I don't visit it much, but nonetheless, I feel an affiliation with them. So I feel people to whom my kin, if you like, my family are doing this. We're not supposed to do that. We shouldn't do that. We don't believe in that. It's inscribed on our hearts that we don't murder. On the other hand, I perfectly well see that we cannot sit back and be murdered. So I go there and back. I am horrified and sympathetic to the Israeli government's predicament every day. Today I'm for Israel. Tomorrow I'm against Israel, and I'm worn out with not knowing what side of the argument I'm gonna wake up feeling for.
And people will say this to you because you write so personally about it. You leave yourself open to being accused of all sorts of things, I would imagine, Howard. One of which will be you minimize Israeli malfeasance. You minimize the death of children in Gaza. I'm sure you must be told that. How do you respond to people who say that to you?
Well, not many people say that because I thought I don't. I don't. What I've been arguing about recently, I argued about it in a piece in a paper yesterday, in the Observer yesterday, saying I became very angry with television, with BBC television in particular. I could not go on watching the news because every single night was about the death of a Palestinian baby. It broke you see a beautiful child, you see footage of a beautiful child, and then you're told that it's been murdered, or you see it being murdered, killed, you see it being its life over, whatever the circumstances, and you cannot bear it. Am I to believe that the Israelis deliberately go out of their way to kill babies? I cannot believe that. I mean, there are stories that there are Rod snipers, and in any army and in any violent conflict, there will be individual soldiers doing mad things. That the Israelis deliberately target children, I don't believe. I don't believe it's possible to do. Anybody would think that they kind of fly over and have special planes to pick out babies. You can't do that. And why would they do that?
But I suppose, Howard, dead is dead. And the question I suppose one would say to you is, if these children have died, and you must concede that children have died in considerable numbers in Gaza, how much is that the responsibility of Israel, and how much should we bear witness to that? If there are dead children, there are dead children. There were dead children on October the 7th. We've got to bear witness to that. But do we not need to bear equal witness when it happens in Gaza?
We need to see those children. We need to see those children. We need to know that those deaths have happened. Whoever is to blame for those deaths must be blamed for those deaths. My argument was there's a certain kind of bias in which we just see the child night after night after night, the death child, as though there is nothing else involved, only the killing of children. I don't say deny the killing of children, but ask yourself, in how many conflicts do we see the killing of children, the dead children, as often as we've seen it?
And you link this in your piece. I'm interested in how much you believe this, that there is a kind of anti-Semitic libel that has been going on for millennia that says Jews kill babies. And what some people find hard to swallow here, Howard, is that Israeli government has killed Palestinian children. It is not a libel. There was a libel about Jews killing babies. And actually, if you conflate the two, you're doing something quite dangerous, is what someone might say to you.
Well, what dangerous thing am I doing?
The danger, I suppose, you're doing is you're conflating. One is a libel, the idea that Jews killing babies was fundamentally untrue. It is fundamentally true that the Israeli government has killed children, and therefore the two are not analogous.
Yes, but at the time of that, what we now call a libel, people would have said it is fundamentally true that Jews kill children. It's only afterwards that we call it a libel. At the time, the whole of Christianity absolutely believed it. So if at the time the whole of Christianity and the Muslim world believes it now, it's no more necessarily true than it was then.
But I think that's not.
Children die. The fact that children die can't be denied. There's never been a war yet in which children haven't died. How many children do you think died when we were fighting the Germans on both sides?
Yeah.
Children die. I'm not going to say it's collateral damage because I think that's callous. It doesn't feel like collateral damage. It feels unbearable. But what on earth do you do? And this is before we even get on to that, to the business of how Hamas and Hezbollah conceal themselves and their weapons in schools and so on. We saw that several times. Israel accused of blowing up a school. Of course they did. Of course they did it. Then we discovered actually they hadn't done it. Something else had happened. Did anybody apologize? No, because it is necessary to believe this. It is. One has to draw a distinction between what happens and the necessity to believe the callousness of one side against another.
And just finally, Howard, we were talking to Ian Wilson earlier, and he was saying at some point there has to be this moment, as happened in South Africa, as happened in Northern Ireland, where people sit down and you let the dead bury the dead. We seem a long, long way away from that now.
We are a long, long way away from that now, and it's very hard to imagine it happening. And I don't think it helps. I don't think it helps the peace that we want for we outside in the diaspora of all this, to be on either side, cheering on the Israelis or cheering on the Palestinians. That doesn't help. There have been voices outside this war and previous wars have encouraged both sides to believe it's a winnable war. Hamas must be very encouraged by the support it has received for what it did on this terrible day a year ago. And do we help? Do we help by lying about it, by saying it didn't happen, or by justifying it? Do we help by running through, by people on our universities making a hero of people who massacred? That doesn't help. So we have to be more intelligent about what's going on. If you think I've not been intelligent enough about what's going on the one side, I will go back and I will read and I will correct and I will think again, because one has to contain within oneself both truths.
Yeah.
The possibility that one is wrong. Contain within yourself the possibility that you are wrong. Certainty kills.
Never trust anyone who believes anything 100% is a golden rule in life that everyone should probably follow. Howard, what a pleasure talking to you. Really interesting stuff. Thank you for joining us. We are, of course, remembering the dead and commemorating the tragedy. At what point on a day like this is it also correct to ponder the Israeli reaction to it and the extent to which that was done in a proportionate fashion?
Well, what actually makes me most sad and angry about what happened exactly a year ago today is that it could so easily have been prevented. If only actually senior men in the IDF, in the Israeli army, and in the intelligence services had listened to what women were telling them. Because there were all these female border spotters on the border posts with Gaza saying Hamas are planning something really big. And you need to take notice. We need to do something about it. They're going to invade. And their superiors were just saying, don't be ridiculous. And then a veteran female intelligence officer said exactly the same and said, look, this is going to be something that we've never seen before. It's going to be absolutely huge. And again, she was just batted back and told to wind her neck in. And isn't that a terrible thought that none of this need have happened? Not just the it was about 1,200 Israelis who were killed a year ago today, but the 40,000 odd Palestinians who've been killed since in Gaza. All those lives could have been saved.
I wonder also whether there was a political aspect to it as well, Marianne, which was that Netanyahu was interested in the West Bank and was devoting his mind, his intelligence's mind, and probably some military attention as well upon the West Bank, an occupation there, rather than thinking about Gaza.
Yeah, and they underestimated Hamas. They just said, so these women, this intelligence officer was told, that Hamas doesn't have the capability, so just don't worry about it. And she was right and they were wrong.
And Melanie was saying they've probably got some pride back in terms of their intelligence service over what's happened over the last few weeks in Lebanon. Andrew, is it right to reflect on proportionality when we try and calibrate our reaction to an anniversary like this?
Well, obviously, heartbreak is heartbreak, and that's what everybody feels today who's got a heart at all, thinking of what happened to those people on October the 7th. I don't think adding up the numbers and saying 1,200 people were killed there, 40,000 people were killed there, is going to help very much, quite honestly. But what I do think is that the old Bible rule that an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, as somebody wisely remarked, if you follow that rule, you will end up with a world of blind, toothless people. And that's what we've got at the moment. Melanie Phillips was completely right to say that it was an act of neo-genius to explode all the walkie-talkies and the mobile phones of these thugs. But that's a very short-term way of looking at things. And when you look at some of the other awful aftermaths, I mean, what's going on in the Middle East is an aftermath of the British colonial era, basically. And, the British mandate, which British were trying to do their best after the Second World War, and obviously they couldn't. They made promises to the Arabs and they made promises to the Jews of the same bit of land. We all know that. Similar problems in South Africa, similar problems in Ireland, etc., etc. And when you look at South Africa or Ireland, you know that there comes a point where the Queen shakes hands with Martin McGuinness, the man who'd tortured British soldiers with his own hands, the man who'd served the IRA, which had blown up the Queen's uncle and some of her family. You've got to reach the point, which Melanie Phillips wasn't thinking about, why should she today? But one day we've all got to think about it, and the rest of the world should think about it, when these violent enemies come together.
But is that, I mean, it's such a good point that a sort of Truth and Reconciliation Commission was the word that they had in South Africa, where everyone sits down and concedes faults, concedes horrors, and says, well, we start page one anew.
We've got to have page one, which is, it requires a huge imaginative effort, which Nelson Mandela had, which actually Tony Blair and President Clinton had in Ireland. And there are plenty of people on all sides in the Middle East, all 9 fronts or 7 fronts or 25 fronts that Melanie Phillips believes in. And there are plenty of people who want peace, and they want people to be able to take their children to school in the morning without having their heads blown off. But it cannot be solved by acts of war on either side.
But do you think it would be solved by another means, and what would that be?
It would be solved, I think, but I mean, this is a horrible thing to say on October the 7th. But when it happened, I don't think it was the place of the British government, in those days Rishi Sunak, but utterly supported by Keir Starmer, to say we support Israel, whatever it does. And of course, the United States did the same. I think they should have said from day one, we must have justice, truth, and peace, and please hold your horses. Of course, what's happened has been absolutely dreadful. Nobody's denying that. But simply marching in to the Gaza, which is a hellhole anyway, and killing people on a mammoth scale for perfectly understandable reasons, and similarly in southern Lebanon, similarly in the West Bank, is only going to solve the thing, if you're putting inverted commas around the word solve, as Melanie has probably done, in the short term.
Is that naive, though, in the end, Mary? And just to conclude this, because I'm sure there's great sense in what Andrew is saying, but if any country that suffered October the 7th is going to go in with military, and thus the cycle perpetuates itself.
Yes, I mean, I'm sorry to say they had to retaliate. I mean, we would have retaliated, wouldn't we, under those circumstances? And I would love them to sit down, negotiate, find a diplomatic solution. I mean, of course, that's what's got to happen. They've got to stop killing each other. But I wonder whether it can still happen with this Iranian regime in charge. I fear it probably can't. What I would love to see is a successful, rather than an unsuccessful, popular uprising against the mullahs in Iran. And that just might be able to reset the whole process of peace in the Middle East.
Yes, but if I'm allowed to reply to that, and of course my heart agrees with Marianne, but it isn't for the West to be deposing regimes, however much we hate them. Look what happened when we did that in Iraq.
I wasn't suggesting the West oppose it. I talked about
but sitting here saying
we
hope the popular uprising will be imposing Western values on Iran, which isn't necessarily the right way of doing it.
Well, hang on a second. They used to have values before the theocratic revolution.
Exactly.
So that's not Western values. That's Iranian. That's Persian values.
No, I know. Yeah. That's what I would like to think would happen. But I'm very, very pessimistic, I must say.
Yeah, and maybe we need a whole generation of new leaders. That's another way of looking at it. You mentioned Mandela. Maybe you need new leaders in Israel, new leaders across the region.
We need an Iranian Mandela, we need a Jewish Mandela, etc. And they're not there, those people.